Global net liquidity is exploding right now, and that's not something to really shrug off. The surge in liquidity means unprecedented monetary destruction, economic stagnation, and an expansion of risky assets. Conditions that could reshape the financial landscape in ways that most people aren't ready for. But what exactly does this mean? Let's talk about it. All right, so I want to take a quick minute to share some thoughts in relation to a couple of graphs I've come across, just basically pointing at how global liquidity is starting to tick upward now. And due to all the pivoting right now by the major central banks, that to me is a sign that legalized counterfeiting is about to begin. And this type of counterfeiting that's coming is going to be massive. And what people don't realize is the impact that will have on every single dollar or euro or whatever it is that's just parked sitting around doing nothing, and how that would impact the last little bit of purchasing power that these mediums of exchange actually retain. And so it's no surprise that at this current moment, because of the debt being so large, that there's no way of paying things off. So the only way out is to default via currency debasement. And that's what we're going to witness in the next 6 to 12 months in my estimations, based upon what I see coming down the line. So in this video here, I just want to share some thoughts on how this might play out. And more importantly, share with you some thoughts and ideas that you should consider on how to maneuver through the days ahead, given that for the base case minimum, I'm anticipating at least $10 trillion just to get started after this next crash, correction, or whatever it's going to be called when we look back in the history books. But then after that 10 trillion, fiat currency will never look the same again. Hence the idea of CBDCs, which are coming. And so for sure, you're going to want to stick around to the very end of this video here, where I try to tie all this together and share with you a method which I'm using, which so far has worked out pretty well. But more important, if you guys want to see more of these videos, definitely hit the thumbs up button. After watching this video, drop a comment, whether it be a thought, idea, or a suggestion, or a question. And if it's something within my wheelhouse, I definitely love to comment on it. And then lastly, take this and share it so other people can get a different perspective on what's really happening out here in this monetary system. But to try to explain this in a way that's simple to understand, imagine you're on a sinking ship. So instead of plugging the holes, the crew starts pouring in more water, hoping it will somehow keep the boat afloat or balance it out. That's exactly what the governments around the world are doing with the currency right now. So you have massive amounts of liquidity are being pumped into the system where currency is being printed, debt is being expanded. None of this is fixing the fundamental problems. So all it's doing is devaluing the currency further. And so the more currency that's printed, the less it's worth. And then over time, this destroys the purchasing power of the remaining currency, whether it be dollars, euros, yen, you name it. They're all caught in the same wave. So think about this. Your paycheck today buys less than it did a year ago, and it's only going to get worse. And so the question is, what's driving this? It's quite obvious for some, but governments aren't cutting spending, even in the face of record high inflation. So instead, they're borrowing more, racking up debt at unprecedented levels. And so here, for example, in the US, the Treasury estimates that between 2024 and 2034, the national debt could balloon by $16 trillion without any major crisis or recession. So think about that. So that's just normal operations. And then there are the unfunded liabilities, where we have future promises that governments have made, like pensions and healthcare benefits, but haven't yet paid for it. So they already match over 100% of the country's GDP. So literally, Uncle Sam has already extended his credit line well beyond what he can afford. And so now the next question is, where does that excess come from? They got to create it out of nowhere. So in countries like, France and Spain, they're even higher with ranges of 400% to 500% of GDP. So it's like running up your credit card to buy things you can't afford and expecting your kids to pay the bills in the future. And so the result is quite obvious, and the economy is stuck in neutral. So this is what's called secular stagnation, a long period of time of no growth or little growth. So when governments are drowning in debt, there's less investment in things that actually grow the economy, like infrastructure, education, or technology. So we end up with a sluggish economy with very little activity, while risky assets like stocks or speculative investments get more inflated, where investors pour in even more currency into these assets, not because the economy is doing great, but because they're looking for anything that can protect the purchasing power of their currency. And so it's like being stuck in a quicksand. The harder you struggle to keep up with the rising prices, the deeper you sink. So wages aren't rising fast enough to keep pace with inflation. Your savings are losing value every single day, that you're not earning interest on your savings at a rate that's higher than the real inflation rate. And what they tell us is it's 2.5 or 2.6 or whatever they want to tell us. But then again, that's their figures, not reality. In reality, depending on where you get your source from, it's closer to 8, 9, 10, depending on what city, what part of the world you're in. And so imagine large amounts of parked currency in an account earning less than the real inflation rate. So you're already in negative real interest rates. And so that's just in the short term. So you imagine that same concept over the last several years. Now you have compounded inflation, where you can understand how over time you're going to buy less because when you actually look at the price of items on this shelf, the sticker price have to go up incrementally for a multitude of reasons. But ultimately, this $1 that I have in my lap here no longer purchases anything of substance. I have to add 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 on top of it. And that's one of the monetary phenomena that's not really well understood that people have to face. So meanwhile, you have risky assets like stock, cryptos, and real estate keep climbing in nominal value, but they're balancing on an increasingly fragile base. So these investments might seem like they're lifeboats, but if the tide turns, they could capsize just as fast as they rose. So what can be done to avoid this? One of the options, governments could start cutting back on spending and focus on real economic growth, but that's not what we're going to see or should expect. So instead, political conversation remains focused on expanding entitlements and spending programs, which only adds more weight to the already overloaded system. So it's crucial to understand that the governments can't create wealth out of thin air first. Every new spending program that they create is paid for by borrowed currency that doesn't even exist yet, and eventually that debt comes due. So usually, at the expense of the middle and lower class, everyone gets screwed, even themselves. But if the world continues on this path, which it has to, we're looking at even more monetary destruction. So your savings will lose even more value faster. Therefore, your paycheck will stretch thinner and thinner over time. And while the stock market might look like it's reaching new highs, those highs will be built on the crumbling foundation of over-leveraged economies. And so it's a cycle of expansion that looks impressive on the surface. Beneath it lies unprecedented risk. And so at the end of the day, if you take away nothing from this discussion here, just realizing that because of the currency crisis that we're witnessing right now and the fact that liquidity is rising globally, we're going to see more debasement at a much faster rate. Therefore, the central bankers' lies of fighting inflation was just to get them through the last 2 or 3 years or so post-COVID lockdowns and the stimulus injection. But now we're about to really face reality. And that reality is the fact that the system cannot move forward unless more currency is created. So therefore, expect more of these. And it's only natural because we've been conditioned to think about currency and to earn more. To think about if you're earning more of the same thing that's being used against you as a weapon. And that's why it's good to have alternatives. And so I always encourage people to think outside the box. Don't just do or follow conventional financial advice, because that same advice that's been given for years now, in my opinion, is outdated because we're in a new monetary reality right now. So you have to be willing to consider new things and take risk into your own hands, in my personal opinion. So one of the ways that I try to counter the destruction of these instruments here is by having diversified approach towards a variety of things. And for me personally, knowing and seeing what gold is doing right now can't help to talk about the importance of having exposure to precious metals, because that is true money. And so for those who can't actually afford to go out and buy 1/10 of an ounce, a half, or a full ounce, you need to have other options. And that's where fractional gold comes into play. And so in my hand right here is 100 gold back notes, 100 gold back notes in a bundle. And so each one of these notes here has a number 1 printed on it, which is 1/1000th of a troy ounce. But since acquiring this bundle here, the relative purchasing power of what I spent compared to what I now have in this unit here has significantly increased to the point where it's made exchanging this for this worth it, in my opinion. And so just one of these instruments compared to one of these instruments here, they both have the number 1 on top, but there's a world of difference as far as value that they offer, short and long term. And so this has preserved purchasing power, where this right here has lost purchasing power. And so at the end of the day, one thing everybody will learn is that all currency is not created equal. And so this currency here is much different than this currency here. And people are going to find out real soon. And so if you have interested in acquiring some of these fractional gold notes here, go to buygoldnotes.com, links in the description. You can actually select from a variety of notes or packages all the way from 1 up to 50 value note, which is 1/20th of an ounce, as a way to dollar cost average into the space here and protect and preserve everything that you worked hard for. So once just sharing with you some ideas worth considering, as well as what I personally have done. So curious to hear your thoughts. If you found value, as always, hit that thumbs up button, drop a comment down below, or ask a question. I'll definitely look forward to sharing my 2 cents on it. And other than that, I'll catch you guys later.